I discovered this very cool online shopping site. It's mostly clothes, but you also get stuff like cushion covers and other stuff. I've not really looked at the other stuff. But the reason I find it cool is it's called 252 MYA, all right? 252 MYA stands for 252 million years ago. As you may have guessed, it's a paleontology themed site where you can find. So I'm guessing what they do is they actually create the t-shirts and shorts, pants, whatever, all of that. And what you can do is, if you're an artist, you can actually host your art on that site, and a customer can get on and actually choose your art and your piece to actually put onto a t-shirt and print out. The specific sort of artists that you get here are paleo artists, right? So really my jam. All right, I love it. I wanted to actually look at getting something for the kids. And the thing is, when you're ordering, so this is coming in from abroad, and for some reason it's just super painful. 2 years ago, I had tried ordering something from 252 MYA. It just never turned up. And later I found out it probably got stuck at customs, and customs just sort of vanished it, I'm guessing. I don't know. The point is, it never turned up. They were kind enough to give me a refund, and so that was the end of that. I've never sort of given up lusting after the kind of stuff that's on there, and if that's your jam, you should really check it out. Anyway, so I was looking at 252 MI, and then I was thinking back to when you could actually walk into a mall and shop in sometime in the last millennium. And what used to really tick me off, right, is I'd be looking for smart, cool, paleo sci-fi, fantasy themed, interesting stuff for the girls. And obviously the closest I could get was sparkly unicorns, all right? Sparkly unicorns, sequins, pink, maybe white thrown in, but heaven forfend that there's a blue in the girls section, because I mean, we can't have blue in the girls section. You got to be kidding me. So lots of pink, lots of white, lots of sparkly, lots of sequins, lots of frills. Don't get me wrong, sequins and frills have their place in the world, and I'm not like completely dissing them, but there is a line, and that line is so definite, right? I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know, but when you look to the left and it's completely pink and frilly, and look to the right and it's completely blue, and there's mummy's little sweetie, and on the other side it's papa's little tiger. And it's ridiculous how gendered children's fashion is, all right? And after a point, you're just like, guys, this is lazy. This is so lazy, man. Come on, you can do better than this. I'm going to put out a blue t-shirt, and I'm going to put out a pink t-shirt. This one's going to have a tiger. That one's going to have a unicorn. Bam, spring, summer 2021, we're on, right? I mean, you've got to get better than this. And anyway, so that was my pet peeve for a while. And the fact, the random fact that sort of came to mind was back about 100 years ago, and 100 in literal earth around the sun years, not 100 in how long it seems since the lockdown started. But 100 years ago, there was no such, sort of gender distinction in terms of color. First of all, clothes for kids were clothes for kids. If you were lucky, your kids survived past the age of like 5 or 8 or whatever, and then it was worth actually spending money on dressing these extremely mortal little humans up, right? What happened is, and so they used to have basically white frocks for everybody. And you got to go back and look at these ancient, well, I say ancient, 120 or 150 year old photographs or daguerreotypes or whatever they call them back then. You'd see these little children with lots of curls wearing these very cute pinafores, and you'd have to read the names to know whether they were male or female. And that was the age of great mustachioed men and extremely, sort of frocked up ladies. But the kids looked just generically kids. The reason for this, obviously, other than, mortality or whatever, which I don't know how much of a reason mortality was. But anyway, the reason for this was that most kids' clothes were white, because white could be easily bleached, easily cleaned. And obviously kids, if you're not a parent, you probably don't know this, but kids are notoriously messy, and it's easy to just sort of bleach the hell out of those clothes and kind of get them clean. And what happened is, around the turn of the century, or maybe a little earlier, they started creating pastel colors in cloth, And pastel colors also work reasonably well with bleaching. And they realized that they could actually, do kids clothes with pastel colors. And even then they were not gendered, right? So for a while, just they had a range of kids clothes in various pastels, and you just put your kid, irrespective of gender, into whatever clothes you got. Then maybe around, say, the 1910s or so, slowly this idea that the boys should be one color and the girls should be one color, and one color is pink and one color is blue, sort of developed. And of course, pink being the color of energy and virility was the color of the boys, and blue being the color of cool calmness was the color of the girls. And so about 100 years ago, all the boys were wearing pink and all the girls were wearing blue. In as much as there was, this sort of gender differentiation in clothes, it still wasn't as strong as it is now. It would look remarkably different than what it is today. So this whole cultural sort of setting, this idea that, the boys section is the blue section and the girl section is the pink section, is something that just sort of happened post the Second World War. And there's no real reason why. It just sort of, as people started creating various sorts of designs and various options for kids, it just sort of migrated to the other side, and it's kind of stuck with that. I think it's around the time people started looking at children as little humans that you could actually invest in, and not extremely mortal, sort of little things, right? So as mortality rates, I suppose, and I'm really extrapolating here, but I'm tying together various threads of evidence that I have. As mortality rates grew, I think people were more comfortable investing in fashion, investing in looks for their kids. And obviously then it starts looking at, well, if the ladies are wearing this is probably what the girls should wear. And if the gents are wearing this, and this is what the boys should wear, so on and so forth. Until 1950s onwards, it was pretty well sorted that the boys were blue and the girls were pink. It stayed that way for the longest time. Until now, I think, and in the last few years, the whole sort of gender revolution, such as it is, has really sort of brought out the whole idea that gendered clothing is quite an unnecessary sort of feature of fashion. And I just want to go back actually and talk about this. I just remember this. One of the big drivers, by the way, of the adoption of separate styles for girls and boys was prenatal testing. Okay? When they realized that you could figure out the gender of the baby before it was born, the clothing manufacturers, like all good capitalists, never shy of jumping on an opportunity to just kind of differentiate markets, create segmentation where there is none, and then sort of market the hell out of, this new lines of product. Right? So they jumped into this idea that if it's something that you can do before they're born, you know what? Why don't you buy themed clothing and have everything ready? So you'll have your room ready, you'll have your clothes ready, everything will be set up. And down the line, that's the journey that ended up with gender reveal parties. I don't even want to get into what a gender reveal party in India is, and with all of that history and all of that fun. But so I'm going to skip that. But so that's the journey, all right? And so now we're at a place where, thankfully, after all this while, we've realized, or perhaps we're beginning to realize, that gendered clothing is not really something that we need to worry about too much, at least in kids to start with, all right? It clearly hasn't trickled down, this message, to a lot of the brands for children, a lot of the people who are doing the designing for brands for children. It's there, clearly there is a certain amount of resistance. And so to this day, when you look for designs online, at your standard stores, you're going to see very, very gendered looks. So right now what's happening is, I don't know if you're aware, I don't know why I am aware, that Harry Styles has just sort of posed in a skirt. And I'm going to exercise my millennial right of nostalgic remembrance and talk about the time when David Beckham wore a skirt at some point. And so it's turned into this thing, and suddenly we're having these huge debates about, oh man, how are men kind of feminizing themselves? Are we losing our masculinity? Are we losing what it is that makes us a man? I mean, I can't think of, lots of Indian men in lungis, lots of Scotsmen in kilts, and many such costumes across the world in sort of native and indigenous tradition. All these people apparently are not losing their masculinity. So I shouldn't think a skirt should do it for Harry Styles. I think the fact that he's a member of One Direction already did it. Okay, sorry, cheap joke. But anyway, the point being, so there's all this controversy and there's a lot of noise being expended and a lot of energy being expended on how masculinity is at risk, and the idea that men should look like big, beefy, macho men, and women should look like women, and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to get into how ridiculous that is. But I do want to talk about the fact that what we're doing here is we're living the controversies of the past, really. I think gendered controversies or controversies around gender are slowly sort of, it's happening now, and there's a lot of Sturm und Drang right now, a lot of noise, a lot of violence around it. But I think the direction that we're moving in is that gender is soon going to perhaps be not obsolete, but not quite what it is today. All right. And I'm trying to be really careful here because I don't want to say something that is in any way incorrect, inappropriate, or scientifically wrong, I guess, because the science has really moved on this as well. But I do want to talk about controversy in fashion. And I think the coming year's controversy, right, the controversy for the 21st century, and I suspect moving forward as well, is not a controversy about color, about form, about fit, about how much you're showing or not showing, who's wearing what. It's going to be a question of how much data you're wearing, all right? So when I say how much data you're wearing, we're all already probably users of wearables, right? Most of the people I know are wearing smartwatches. They're wearing smart fitness trackers. That's really been the big push. Fitness has really pushed wearables. And now we're moving into the space of wearable jewelry and, okay, obviously it's wearable jewelry. I mean, wearable smart jewelry, right? And smart clothing, really. That's the next line of wearables. They're not somewhere on the horizon. They're here. They're amongst us. I want to tell you about this really interesting piece of tech that I've read about. It's called Joule, and Joule because could be a jewel, but it's also Joule, as in the jewel. And the jewel is actually a earring, or rather, it's a earring backing, right? So the little bit that fixes the earring from the back of the ear, right, to the back of the ear. And so what the jewel does is you can wear a regular earring and use this at the back, and it's just like this tiny little chip. It's a brilliant piece of design. It is absolutely fabulous. And so what it does is it's sort of pinned onto the back of the ear. It tracks your heart rate, tracks the calories you've burned, tracks the activity level. It's pretty awesome. You can sort of really have a really sort of intelligent wearable and yet be, actually look classically fashionable, or, wear earrings that really are not tech looking earrings. It's just regular earrings, right? And it's a great concept. I love it. It's beautiful. So that's one. And the other one, these, honestly, I mean, they're hilarious. I don't know if they're really, I don't know if they're universally funny, but I just found them hilarious. Okay. So they're called Nadi X, and Nadi X is by this company called Wearable X. Nadi X are smart yoga pants. All right. So there's sort of sensors and little vibration elements that are woven into the pants, all right? And what they do is, so they use Bluetooth to connect to your phone. I'm not kidding. These are your yoga pants, all right? Your yoga pants are connecting to your phone through Bluetooth. The phone is actually playing out an exercise, going through the yoga practice, in audibly. And the pants are kind of picking that up. And as you do your stretches, as you do your asanas, the pants are actually vibrating in the specific regions that you need to put more effort into. So you can concentrate on those regions and really push yourself. And at the same time, they're also picking up on, they're picking up your data, they're picking up your moves, they're picking up your whatever, your heart rate, blah, 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 whatever else, right? And that's phenomenal, man. That's crazy. I'm just thinking about putting on a pair of pants that track your stats and tell you what a good sort of yoga, Maharishi yoga chap person you are. It blows my mind. And so anyway, coming back to the fact, what's the controversy here, right? So the controversy here is, look at the amount of data any person with a wearable is generating continuously every time that wearable is on and every time they're wearing it. All right. It's incredible. And so you have organizations, right, that are able to pick up simple things like your heart rate, your movement, your levels of fitness, your general levels of fitness, etc. And so that is being sort of vacuumed up, all right? And so you have these giant data banks that could theoretically give any organization a real insight into the general health of a vast population or a vast segment of the population. That's one. But two is, so let's say, your smartwatch not only looks after your health, but also looks after the health of your house, right? As people are sort of smartening up their houses and using their smartwatch to turn the lights on, turn the security cameras on, turn the TV on and off, or the ACs on and off, or whatever, right? Lock, unlock, etc. So you've got that sort of next level happening over there. And then from there, down the line, and I'm pretty sure it's happening already, down the line, you'll be controlling financial information, you'll be controlling identity information, and you already are through your various payment gateways on your phone and your other, maybe your watches, for example. And so what's happening slowly is that we're uploading so much more of our lives into the cloud, and we're also putting out all of these routes, all of these little doors or little access ways into our data. Because look, once your data is on, and you know this, once your data is on, it's on. And whether you're accessing it through your phone, or whether it's through your smartwatch, or through your Joule, or through your Nadi pants, or whatever, I just want to make clear, I'm not sort of saying anything about the security preparedness of these products. I'm just pointing out an inherent risk, right? Inherently, there is a pathway, perhaps through your fitness tracker, to your financial information. And that's a pretty awesome thought. And obviously organizations are fighting to keep the security, while security levels are statedly high, they don't want too many barriers, because ideally as much data as they can collect on you, they'd like to collect. And so that, I suspect, and is really waiting to explode into this really big controversy. So what's happening right now is we're at the stage of sort of experimentation and moving into consolidation, right? So everyone's experimenting with all the things that can happen, and all the technologies and all the things that you can wear. And so you have a 1,000 startups, each focusing on something else, one on jewelry, one on rings, one on watches, one on whatever. So it's all happening. But look at watches, for example. Watches, there's a slow consolidation, right? Apple and Samsung and a couple of others slowly sort of picking up all these little disparate pieces and stitching them together to kind of fit into their ecosystem. And that's going to happen with, say, jewelry. That's going to happen with clothes. That's going to happen with smart shirts. That, down the line, you're going to have these vast conglomerates that are able to control your data, or not able to control, rather they do control your data, or have access to your data from the moment. So it's almost like a birth to death situation, right? And then who has the rights to that data? All right. How much of your medical right to privacy are you signing away? Are these questions being asked? I don't know. So I've done a little bit of reading, and obviously here in India, these questions aren't really, sort of at the top of mind right now. Everyone's so excited to have the next shiny gadget that they're not really thinking about this. But are we asking the right questions over here? Who's going to be responsible for all of that data? Who has access to all of that data? Can I have some gateways or checks in place so that my data isn't freely available across the board every time? So tomorrow, I don't know, Apple decides or figures out a way to buy Samsung, or vice versa. Not that it'll happen, but suddenly people I've never given my data to have access to all of my data, because that's part of that organization's assets. It's already happening, I have no doubt. And we're obviously also very aware of it when it comes to our say our emails and our WhatsApp security. Or organizations are obviously very cognizant of the fact when they're looking at their data security, when they're handing over their sort of data, putting their data on the cloud. But what about individuals? Where are the individual rights? Where are the individual checkpoints? And where can individuals draw a line and say thus far and no further? I suspect right now it's not very sort of anywhere at all. I suspect that we don't have too many rights, And the more we sort of dive into this whole wearable story, the more we're sort of signing away the rights that we do have and just sort of handing over our lives. And I don't want to sound like some tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. This is not about, Satan taking over the world by sort of putting the mark of Satan on all our heads in our technology or whatever. This is about sort of calling what I suspect the next big controversy is going to be, the next big challenge is going to be, and the next big fight. And I suspect, given the billions and billions of dollars that are at risk over here, this fight is going to be a lot more difficult than trying to get really good sort of blue-based clothes for girls or pink-based clothes for boys, right? I suspect that is already changing, but this is going to take a lot more fighting. It's going to take a lot more activism. It's going to take a lot more action on individual parts and collective parts. And I don't know if our governments are even going to support this, because, hey, there's money to be made for them as well. I'm not going to get intensely political, so I'm just going to kind of sign off and say, watch out where you're handing that data, figure out, where it's going. Those end user license agreements are deliberately obtuse, but see if you can kind of walk your way through one of them and figure out where it's all ending up. I've read a couple, and boy, you do not want to know. The good news is, though, I will have less sort of gender issues now shopping for my girls, I'm hoping, over the next couple of years, and they'll have more choices as well. So I'm going to put a silver lining on this pig to mix my metaphors very thoroughly, and I'm going to see you around. Have a good one.